The hot sun beat down on the vast plains, casting a golden glow over the endless horizon. A solitary figure rode a horse across the wide, empty land, the sound of hooves pounding against the dry earth, the only noise breaking the silence. Jack Turner, the lonely rancher, had spent many years living alone in his small, quiet ranch. He was used to the isolation, the long days spent tending to his cattle, fixing fences, and repairing the barn. There were no visitors, no family, no friends. Just him and the land. But today, as he rode across the land to check on his herd, something caught his eye. It was a flicker of movement, a figure stumbling through the tall grass. Jack pulled on the reins, stopping his horse, and stared ahead. At first, he thought it was just a deer or some wild animal, but as he squinted against the sun, he saw it clearly. A woman. His heart skipped a beat. She was stumbling, barely able to keep her balance, her skin pale and covered in dirt. Her clothes were torn, and she was clearly injured. Jack's hand instinctively went to his rifle, but he quickly lowered it. The woman wasn't a threat. She was weak, barely able to stand. Without thinking, Jack urged his horse forward. He didn't know why, but something inside him told him to help her. She was in danger, and he was the only one around to do something about it. He rode closer, calling out to her softly.
"Hey, are you all right?"
The woman turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with fear. She staggered, almost falling to the ground, but Jack quickly dismounted and caught her before she hit the dirt. She was burning with fever, her skin hot to the touch, and she looked as though she had been through a nightmare. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes unfocused, and Jack knew she wouldn't last long if he didn't do something fast. "Hold on," Jack muttered, lifting her onto his horse. He wasn't sure who she was or how she had gotten here, but he knew he couldn't leave her to die. She was too weak to fight back, too lost to survive on her own. With great care, he rode back to his ranch, his mind racing with questions. Was she a settler, a traveler, or someone else entirely? He had heard of the local native tribes, but he had never crossed paths with them before. Still, he didn't care. She needed help, and that was all that mattered. The ranch was quiet when they arrived. It was always quiet. The wind whistled through the cracks in the barn, and the cows mooed softly in the distance. Jack helped the woman off the horse, carefully guiding her into his small home. He had no idea what to do for her, but he knew he had to try. Inside, he laid her on his bed, the only bed in the house. He didn't have much, but the bed was the most comfortable place he could offer her. She groaned weakly, her face twisted in pain, and Jack quickly went to work. He boiled water on the stove, trying to cool her fever, and cleaned her wounds as best as he could. Her skin was covered in cuts and bruises, but it was her exhaustion and weakness that worried him most. As Jack worked, he couldn't help but feel a strange connection to this woman. She was so different from anyone he had ever met. Her dark hair was tangled and matted, her clothes dirty and torn, but there was something about her that stirred something inside him. Maybe it was the way she fought to stay conscious, her strong will to survive despite everything that had happened to her. Or maybe it was her quiet, desperate gaze that pleaded for help. Whatever it was, Jack couldn't turn his back on her. For the next few hours, Jack did everything he could think of. He fed her water, applied bandages to her wounds, and kept her as comfortable as possible. She didn't speak, and Jack didn't press her for answers. He didn't need to know her story right now. All he needed to do was get her through this. When the night finally came, Jack sat by her side, watching her closely. Her breathing had become more regular, but she still hadn't woken up. He wondered what had brought her to this point, what had led her to be so injured and alone in the wilderness. Had she been attacked? Was she running from something? He couldn't say. But as he sat there, the loneliness of his own life seemed to vanish. For the first time in years, he had someone to care for, someone who needed him. The quiet stillness of the ranch was broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden house and the faint sound of the wind outside. Jack didn't mind the silence, but tonight, with the woman lying in his bed, the silence felt different. It felt like an unspoken bond, a promise that he would keep her safe, that he wouldn't leave her to die alone in the wilderness. As the hours passed, Jack finally gave in to exhaustion. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing for just a moment. But before he could drift off to sleep, he heard a soft sound from the bed. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. The woman was stirring, her eyes fluttering open. Jack's heart raced as he stood up quickly, rushing to her side. "Hey, you're awake," he said softly, his voice a little rough from hours of silence. The woman blinked at him, confusion in her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Where am I?" You're safe, Jack replied, trying to reassure her. You're at my ranch. You've been through a lot, but you're gonna be okay. The woman looked around, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She didn't know where she was or how she had gotten here, but she knew she wasn't dead. She had closed her eyes, expecting the end, but instead, she had woken up in an unfamiliar place with a stranger who had saved her life. Jack sat down beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. He didn't know what the future held or how this woman would react to being in his care, but for now she was alive, and that was enough. The days that followed were quiet, almost peaceful, but there was a strange tension in the air. The woman, whose name Jack had learned was Maya, had become more alert, though still fragile. Her eyes, once full of fear and confusion, began to show a little more trust each day. Yet she said little, and Jack could sense that something weighed heavily on her. She hadn't shared much about herself, and Jack wasn't the kind of man to press. He respected her silence, knowing that time would help ease whatever burdens she carried. Jack's ranch was small, simple, and isolated, just the way he preferred it. He had no need for company. The animals, the work, and the land kept him busy enough. But Maya's presence had changed the routine. There were still cows to care for and fences to mend. But Jack found himself thinking more often of the woman he had taken in, wondering if she was feeling any better, if she was comfortable, if she needed something. Maya, for her part, was trying to adjust to the new reality. She had woken up in a stranger's home, a stranger's bed. She had never imagined a life like this. Her tribe had been everything to her, her family, her culture, her way of life. She had been taught that survival came from strength, that showing vulnerability was a weakness. Yet here she was, unable to protect herself, relying on the kindness of a man she didn't know. She didn't remember much about how she ended up in Jack's care. The last thing she recalled was running, trying to escape from something, someone, and then darkness. She had almost given up on life when she'd collapsed in the wilderness. Now she was alive, but she wasn't sure if it was a gift or a curse. For the first few days, Maya kept to herself, not speaking much, and Jack respected her need for space. He would bring her food, check on her, but he never pushed her to talk. He knew what it was like to be alone, to carry burdens that no one else could understand, and he didn't want to make her feel pressured. Still, he wondered about her, who she was, what had happened to her, and why she was out there alone and wounded. As the days passed, Maya began to feel stronger. The fever that had once burned through her body slowly faded, replaced by a faint warmth from the sun streaming through the ranch's windows. Jack had cared for her with a quiet, patient kindness, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward him. He had saved her life even though he didn't have to. He could have left her to die out there in the wilderness, but he hadn't. One afternoon, Jack found Maya sitting outside the ranch house, her back against the rough wooden wall, staring at the land stretching out before her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the field. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes distant. Jack hesitated before walking up to her. "Feeling better?" he asked gently. Maya looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time in days. There was a flicker of something, trust or maybe just curiosity. "I am, thank you," she replied softly. Her voice was still weak, but the words were clear. She had been speaking very little, but now, for the first time, she seemed to be willing to open up. Jack nodded. "You've been through a lot. It'll take time to heal." Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked out at the horizon, her gaze fixed on the wide, empty plains. "I never imagined a life like this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "This place. I was running, but I didn't know where. I didn't know who would be out here. I thought it was over." Jack didn't know what to say to that. He didn't want to remind her of the pain she had just been through, but he could tell she was trying to make sense of everything. "You don't have to explain anything to me," he said, sitting down beside her. "You're safe here, Maya. You can stay as long as you need." She glanced at him, her expression guarded. She had been taught never to trust the white men who lived on the land. But there was something different about Jack. His kindness was genuine. She had seen it in the way he had cared for her when she was too weak to even speak. He had saved her life, and in return he asked for nothing. That was more than she could say for most people she had known. "I don't know if I can stay," Maya said slowly, her eyes lowering to the ground. "I don't belong here, my people. They're far away. I don't know what to do now." Jack understood. He had lived a life of solitude for so long that he hadn't considered what it might be like for someone like Maya. who had come from a world entirely different from his own. He didn't know what it felt like to be torn from everything he had known. But he could see that she wasn't ready to accept help from him, not fully. She wasn't ready to let down the walls she had built around herself. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Jack said gently. "Just take it one day at a time." For the next few days, their routine remained much the same. Jack worked the ranch and Maya spent most of her time outside, sitting quietly watching the land. Sometimes Jack would catch her looking at the cattle or at the sky, her face thoughtful. He wondered what she was thinking, but he didn't press her for answers. She would talk when she was ready. It wasn't until the evening of the fourth day that Jack saw a real change. After finishing his chores, he was walking back to the house when he saw Maya standing by the fence watching the sunset. The wind was blowing her hair back, and for the first time, Jack noticed something different in her posture. She wasn't slumped or weary. She stood tall, her face turned toward the horizon, a quiet strength emanating from her. Jack stopped a few feet away from her, not wanting to disturb the moment. But Maya sensed his presence and turned to face him. There was something new in her eyes, something softer, less guarded. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "For saving me." Jack nodded, but his expression was serious. "You don't have to thank me. It's what anyone would do." Maya shook her head slowly. "No, not everyone would. I've seen enough of the world to know that." There was a long silence, and for the first time, Jack felt like they were truly communicating. Not just the exchange of words, but the understanding that passed between them. "Do you still want to leave?" Jack asked. Maya hesitated, looking down at the ground for a moment. When she looked up again, her expression had softened. "I don't know. I'm not sure what's out there anymore. But for now, I'm not going anywhere." Jack smiled. It was a small smile, but it was a smile of relief. Maya had begun to trust him, even if just a little. It was enough for now. And with that, the two of them stood together, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The quiet of the ranch was comforting, a silence that no longer felt lonely. It felt like the beginning of something new, something neither of them had expected.